Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing, as you can see, a tier list of Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones. We recently finished a buffed enemy growth Sacred Stones Iron Man playthrough, which is quite the mouthful, but it was a lot of fun. We lost a lot of units, probably the most units, or at least the highest percentage of the cast I've ever lost in an Iron Man, but we got through it. Which is really cool. But as I've been doing with this series where we Iron Man all the games, is I've been making tier lists of those games afterwards. So that's what we're doing here today. So a few things I want to mention about Sacred Stones. Number one, Sacred Stones in particular, as opposed to a lot of the other games I've talked about, does have this overworld. You can fight enemy skirmishes, you can go to the ruins or the tower. So this tier list does not include any. This is more of like an efficiency thing. So it doesn't include any of that, but just know that a lot of these characters are going to can be extremely powerful if you take advantage of those things. It's just this tier list won't is under the pretense that you won't take advantage of those things. So like, for example, Ewan and Amelia are really good examples. We'll talk about them more as we go through the tier list, but these two are going to be really low. But if they essentially immediately come as like promoted, like a paladin and a, you know, summoner, because you take advantage of those things, they're obviously going to be much more powerful. But yeah, with all tier lists that I make, this is efficiency based, so just know that. And Sacred Stones is definitely more of a game where you can get away with using weaker units because it is a bit easier. The other thing I want to mention is that there are choice promotions in this game. So every time you promote a unit, barring like a few specific ones, you get to choose between two classes, which is really, really cool. Now, like most tier lists where you can get away with basically using any unit, and Sacred Stones is no different, you can get away with choosing either of the choices every single time. Just go with whatever one you think is cooler. But if you really want to know, at least my opinion on which one is better, I will be mentioning as we go throughout this, which promotion option I think is better for each class. So in any case, without further ado, let's get right into the list and yeah, talk about the units. We'll start with Archer. I guess I should break down the tiers first, right? Okay, so S tier is the best of the best. So this is just like, should use every single time. If you're not using, there better be some, you know, good reason, because they're just insanely good. A is, I would highly recommend using. They're not quite S tier, they're not God tier, but they're extremely good, and you should use them on basically every playthrough. Again, you should really have a reason not to use these units if you decide not to. B is units that are quite good. They're either like good scalable units, but you don't like, they're not like necessary, there's something wrong with them, or they're just really good like pre-promotes that give you good combat throughout a large percentage of the game. And then C is a big pivot point. They're characters that give you either like a very small niche, or they are scalable, like unpromoted units, but they take a lot of work to get there, so they're not great. And then D, and I should probably make an F, right? Hold on. Row below. Yeah, we should probably make like a meme tier here, right? Meme. Yeah, okay. So D is like really bad, but not quite meme tier. They either have a very, very small niche, or they take quite a bit to scale into anything. And then meme are like, would highly recommend not using. And again, we'll talk about why Amelia and Ewan. Actually, we can just start with Amelia and Ewan. So they're going to start in meme tier. There are 3 trainee units essentially in this game, and they're really cool because they give a lot of options. You not only get to choose which class to promote into on their first promotion option, but then also on their second promotion option, which makes them really awesome units. Unfortunately, Ewan and Amelia are recruited very late in the game, or at least like much later than they should, given how weak they are. Now, as far as like what you should promote them to, Ewan I think should almost assuredly become a shaman and then a summoner, because summoner is really powerful in this game. But you know, mage, knight, druid can all be good options. And then Amelia, I would highly recommend becoming a Cavalier and then a Paladin. We'll talk more about why Paladin's so good as we progress. But yeah, the problem with these units, again, is they're just so weak. Their stats are extremely minimal. It's going to take you a decent amount of setup to even get them to their first tier of unit. And then you still have to get them to promotion. So they're a unit that, again, really, really hard to use. Easy, you know, meme tier. You can make this F tier, whatever you want. But yeah, easy for these two. So anyways, let's start with Archer. Archer's pretty darn good. He is a monk that you get pretty early in the game, which is great. He has solid looking bases. He's very offensively inclined. His defense and especially his luck kind of blows, but Archer, specifically his promotion class, which I would highly recommend being Bishop, actually has a really cool skill in this game called Slayer, which allows you to deal effective damage to all monster type units, which there are a decent amount of in the game. He's also, of course, can heal, and you can just use light magic, you know, against any ordinary foe. So I'm going to put him in B tier. I do think he's a solid unit. I would recommend using him. You certainly don't need to, but Slayer's a really nice skill for the end game, and his offensive stats and the ability to heal when promoted allow him to be really good throughout the early to mid game. So I like Archer quite a bit. Next up we have Calm. I hate thieves. I hate ranking thieves. I don't know where a thief should be. There aren't very many thieves in this game. There's him and Renok. There are chests to open, but not a ton. I'll just shove him in B tier. I don't know. He can promote in this game. There is an Ocean Seal, unlike Fire Emblem 7 where you can promote thieves, but you don't get to do it until basically the end game. You can actually promote Calm fairly early, which is kind of cool. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can, which potentially gives him a little extra combat utility, but no, for the most part, he's just a thief, and I would recommend using him as such. Next up we have Cormag. Cormag, I think, is another one of these B tier units, maybe better than Calm, I don't know. He is a really good class. He's a Wyvern, and he's recruited, I think, just a bit late to be like a really exceptional unit, but I still think he's really strong. He's really easy to train, whether you're doing Ephraim's route and Erica's route. That's another thing I should mention, is there are two different routes in this game, Ephraim and Erica. This isn't going to affect most units, but there are a few units in like Dusel, Salad, Innis, that can actually be affected a little bit depending on the route you do, so we'll talk about those more as we get through them. But yeah, I think Cormag's just a really solid unit. I would recommend doing, oh, I guess I didn't mention Calm. With Calm, I would, what are his options? Rogue or Assassin. If you really want to promote him and you want that combat option, then obviously I think Assassin's the way to go. The nice thing about Rogue is you don't have to use lockpicks, but you don't really have to worry about lockpick usage in this game too much, so probably recommend Assassin with Calm if you do decide to promote him. With Cormag, I would recommend Wyvern. I think it's Wyvern Knight, because Wyvern Lord or Wyvern Knight. Wyvern Knight, it's funny actually, because a lot of the skills in this game really blow, but the Slayer skill on Bishop is really good, and the Pierce skill on Wyvern Knight is really good. It just allows you, I think it like negates the enemy defense when you proc it. It's just good. Like, it just lets you deal extra damage some percentage of the time. You do miss out on getting the swords that you would get if you promoted to Wyvern Lord, but I think that's a pretty low thing, like low bar. It's not that powerful, so would recommend Wyvern Knight, and I think Cormag is a very solid unit. Next up we have Dazla. Dazla is kind of like Hawkeye from Fire Emblem 7, except he's not nearly as necessary and he's not nearly as good. He does have pretty solid bulk, mostly with his HP, and he hits hard, but he's pretty slow. I'm gonna put him down here in C tier. It's just a combination of not being that necessary and not really being that strong. He doesn't scale that well into the late game. I do think he's a solid deployable unit for the mid game. You know, maybe should even be down here in D. I don't know. I think he has good enough stats, and Sacred Stone's enemies, especially in the mid game, are weak enough that he's a reasonable like C tier unit. But yeah, use him if you have a deployment slot available, but frankly not an amazing unit. Next up we have Dusel. So this is one of the units that does, I think, get change a little bit depending if you're doing Ephraim's route or Erica's route. In Ephraim's route, you recruit Dusel in like the middle of it, so he's a lot more useful because you get him for more chapters. And Dusel is one of these tempo units like Dazla that really needs more chapters, because once you get to the end game, he's not going to be as useful. Even on Erica's route, I still think he's a solid B to C tier unit, and I think on Ephraim's he's a solid B tier unit. I'm going to put him in B. He's just like really a better Dazla, and again, he can come about the same time as Dazla, which is good. But even on Erica's route, I still think he's probably like the best pre-promote that isn't Seth that you could deploy in like the even the end game. So I do think he's a solid unit. I think solid B tier for Dusel. Next up we have Erica. Erica really stinks. She's pretty stinky. I'll put her maybe not in meme. The only reason I don't really want to put her in meme is because when she promotes, she gets a horse and she gets to use the legendary weapon, which gives her effective damage against monsters, which is pretty cool. And early on, she's not terrible. I could see her being a meme. I'm gonna put her in D. Yeah, I just think the legendary weapon is pretty nice, but she's really bad. Being sword locked in this game is really rough, like it is in most of the GBA games, and yeah, she does herself no favors. She's very, very similar to Lyn from the previous game, and I've talked to death about, you know, how much I dislike Lyn from the previous game, so easy D tier. You know what, actually, you know, put her in meme, whatever, put her in meme. I just realized, because I'm like, I hate Lyn so much, put her in meme, whatever. Yeah, Dusel, Dazla, and Erica don't have choices on promotions. That's why I didn't talk about them. Next up we have Ephraim. This is another character that, again, is going to depend whether you choose Ephraim or Erica, like their route. I didn't mention this with Erica because she's terrible no matter, you know, whether you choose her route or not. Ephraim is an absolute beast. I don't know if I want to put him in A just because he does have his promotion's late, like most lords, and he sometimes you like don't get him for a high percentage of the game. Like you kind of don't get him until chapter like 16 on some playthroughs. I'll put him in B tier, maybe like high B tier. He is a beast. He gets a legendary weapon just like Erica. He gets mounted when he promotes, and his stats are just fucking insane. So yeah, he's amazing. Maybe I even put him in A tier. He's just so good. Yeah, I don't know, A or B for him, something like that. Would recommend using him. Highly recommend using him. Next we have Ford. So Ford and Kyle are very similar units. Now recently we actually had a discussion that apparently people think Ford is really ass, which in looking at Kyle and Ford and comparing them, I do think it's true that Kyle is the much better unit, kind of like Sane and Kent from the previous game. But again, similar to Sane and Kent from the previous game, I just think that even if one is better than the other, they both basically do the same thing. Like whether you train Ford or Kyle, you're gonna have the same thing going on. So I still think I'm gonna put them together, even though Kyle is definitely the better unit. But apparently people hate Ford, which I think is kind of funny. I'll put them in B. They're both just like reasonable units. Again, they're pretty similar to Kent and Sane from the previous game, where in this case it's Franz, in that case it was Lowen is much better because you recruit them earlier. But they can be nice like tempo Cavs for the mid game, or tempo Paladins, or whatever you want to do, you know, and I think they're both solid units. So I'll put them both in B tier. Next up we have Franz. Franz is a beast, easy A tier. Now S tier for, I actually got a lot of complaints when I put a lot of different units in S tier in Fire Emblem 7. You don't have to worry about that. S tier is very specific for one unit when you play Sacred Stones. So most of my really good units that I highly recommend using are going to be shoved in A. Yeah, I think Franz is great. He has a great class, great bases. He's exceptional. Oh, actually, this will be good because I forgot to mention what to promote Kyle and Ford to. But the same goes for all three of these units. You can either do Great Knight or Paladin. Highly recommend Paladin. Basically, you trade off 2 movement for the ability to use axes. The Great Knight can use axes but has 2 less movement, and the Paladin can't use axes but has 2 additional movement. Trust me, you already have lances. You do not need axes. 2 additional movement is insane. You can certainly get away with a Great Knight, don't get me wrong, and they'll still be strong. Most playthroughs won't utilize movement that extensively anyways, but I would highly recommend doing Paladin. Paladin is in my mind way stronger than Great Knight. But yeah, Franz is just a beast. He's just amazing. Really easy to use, really easy to train, an amazing class. Not much else to say about him. Next up we have Garcia. I like Garcia. I don't know if he should necessarily be quite in B tier. I do think he's solid. He offers really good bases really early in the game, and he scales fairly well. Not as well as a lot of these other units that we've talked about. Maybe like high C tier. Maybe he should be in B, I'm not really sure. I do think he's a good unit. His speed is low. He's not a beast, but he does offer good tempo. I think most playthroughs should just utilize Garcia as like a really solid early game fighter, which is what he is. And I think that offers about a C tier in the tier list. But if you train him, he can be okay. Next up we have Garrick. I really like Garrick. He reminds me a little bit of Melody from Emblem 6. Now he's not that good. He's far from being that good. But what I mean is like, he comes with a promotion item and at level 10, so you can promote him immediately and just get a really solid hero or ranger, or you can wait and get a really good hero or ranger. Either way, it's amazing. By the way, I forgot again to mention what you should be promoting to. Hopefully I'll remember that in the future. So Garcia can either become a hero or a warrior. This one's close. I think you can choose either one. I believe hero has slightly better promotion gains on speed, so I prefer hero, but sword and bow are about the same. You already have access to hand axe, so it's not that big a deal. You can choose whichever one you want on Garcia. I do love me some warrior crit animations, so I think that one's close, and I think that one's really up to you. Garrick also has a really interesting promotion option, one of the closest I think in the entire game, because it's a ranger or a hero, and most promotion options balance 2 things that are not comparable, right? So like with a Cavalier, you can either choose between having axes or 2 movement, and 2 movement is way better than axes, right? Or in the case of like the Slayer skill or another weapon type, or with Cormeg, it's like the Pierce skill or another weapon type. But in the case of Garrick, it's actually kind of interesting because if you do Ranger, you get bows and 2 additional movement, really good. If you do hero, you don't get the 2 additional movement, but you do get axes, which are way better than bows. So I think Ranger is probably the better class because movement is just so good, but in most playthroughs that won't actually utilize movement to that extreme, I think Hero is probably the way to go with Garrick. I usually do Hero. But yeah, either way can be really good with Garrick. I think Garrick's an easy B tier unit. Put him maybe like high B tier. I do think he's really good. He's recruited early enough, and he's got really good bases and pretty solid growth, so I like him quite a bit. Next we have Gilliam. Now Knights do have the benefit of being able to promote to Great Knight, which does give them one additional movement. I would highly recommend Great Knight. General does have Pavice in this game, which every once in a while prevents damage that would be dealt to you. This really isn't that powerful of a skill. I mean, that's what generals are already doing. They're already walls. So Pavice is not that useful of a skill, and the one additional movement on Great Knight is really good. When I mentioned most playthroughs not utilizing movement, it's mostly like when you go from 6 to 8, not that big a deal. When you go from like 5 to 6, that's huge. That's really big. So yeah, unfortunately, Gilliam is still not a particularly good unit. You just don't need a brick wall like this in Sacred Stones. If you do invest in Gilliam, he will be a beast like most knights. But the movement is just really bad. Because, again, of how easy like the early to mid game of Sacred Stones is, a unit like this that just has one less movement than like every other unit you're training is just a huge detriment. So I'm going to put him in D tier, but if you do want to play a little slower and go through the effort, he can be a beast for sure. Next up we have Innis. This is another character that's going to really depend on, or not really depend, but is going to change depending if you do Erica's route or not, because he's recruited earlier. I think he's fine. I'll just shove him in C. He's kind of a boring unit. He's just a sniper. Yeah, sniper's not a very good class. His bases are fine. Just shove him somewhere in C. I don't know. He's fine. Use him if you have a deployment slot. Who cares? I don't know why I hated it so much, but whatever. Who cares? Next up is Joshua. Joshua's a Swordmaster, which in Fire Emblem 6 is great, and Fire Emblem 7 is not so great. In this game is kind of a mix of both. It's fine in this game. He's not like Guy levels of trash, but he's not Rucker levels of being an absolute beast. I would maybe like B or C. I think I'm pretty happy with just him being in C. The nice thing about Joshua as well is, like Garcia, he just has really solid bases, so he can help you out in the early game, whether you train him or not. I could see him being up in B. I don't think training Joshua is a terrible idea, but I think most of these other units are just so much better. Again, class is just so important in Sacred Stones because stats aren't that crucial. Now, as far as his promotions go, you can either do Assassin or Swordmaster. Assassin is probably cooler because you get the lethality skill, which occasionally lets you just murder people outright. But Swordmaster gives you much more consistent crit, which is I prefer. I definitely like Swordmaster and would recommend doing Swordmaster with Joshua, but both can be cool. Both don't. That's one of the problems with Joshua as opposed to like Garrick. Garrick is sword locked, and then both of his promotion options fix that. They give him more movement, they give him 2 range. Joshua is sword locked, and both of his promotion options don't fix that at all. They're both just sword locked again, so that's part of the problem with Myrmidons in this game as opposed to mercenaries. Next up we have Noel. Noel is technically recruited on Ephraim's route, but I'm pretty sure you get him on Scorched Sand either way, so he's not that doesn't really change him very much. Noel's really good, mostly because you can promote him instantly and you get a healer that can summon. Highly recommend, by the way, I'll just say this right now, do Summoner. Summoner's way better than Druid. Druid gets to use anima magic in this game, or anime magic, as I like to call it. But that's, I mean, so minor. Summoning is one of the most powerful things you can do in all of Fire Emblem, and in this game, it's no different. It's so strong. I don't think that really makes him an A tier unit. I'm going to put him somewhere in B here. It's hard to argue with Noel. Like the utility that Noel can provide basically immediately is huge. I may be overrating him a little bit, don't know, but the utility he can provide is so powerful. And basically for free. I mean, you get an Earth Seal on that chapter, so it's as free as it, I guess, can be. Next up we have La Rochelle. Now, unlike Priscilla and Clarion from the previous games, who are Troubadours that are recruited fairly early, La Rochelle, despite being a great class, is recruited pretty late. So I don't think she's a really amazing unit. She's recruited at the same time that Dazla is, and her stats just aren't that good. Her class is great. I'm gonna put her under actually I'll probably put her in D tier. She's recruited so late, right? And you have Mulder, you have Natasha at this point, who are gonna have probably way more magic, and maybe like promoted archer or loot, or whoever. I just don't think she's very good. I mean, a lot of playthroughs will utilize her a little bit. And I do think like characters like Gilliam, if you don't train, will be completely useless. But yeah, I don't know. I don't like La Rochelle very much. She's just recruited so late. So next up we have Lute. So Lute is, I think, really just a worse version of Arthur because she's essentially the same. She got the same stuff going on, except her offense is a little more questionable. She's less bulky, and she doesn't have the Slayer skill. She does get to promote to Mage Knight, which is cool. With La Rochelle, I think you can either do, what the hell does she even promote to? It's like Valkyrie, or I guess it would have to be Mage Knight. I don't know. Do whatever you want with her. Who cares? You can do whatever you want with La Rochelle. Lute, on the other hand, I would recommend Mage Knight. Sage, I think, has a cap of like 30 magic, which is really cool. But Mage Knight gives you additional movement, which is really powerful. But yeah, I really think she's just a worse version of Archer. Now, it doesn't mean that she's trash, obviously. I don't know that she should really be down here in C tier. I still think like B tier for her. An early mage like that, I do think is good. And the fact that she gets to promote to be mounted is quite powerful too. So I'll leave her in B tier. I think she's a good enough class to be in there, somewhere around there. Next up is Marissa, who is just garbage, just absolute garbage. Might actually be the worst character in this game. Marissa is almost assuredly better than Ewan and Amelia, but I just hate her so much. Yeah, she's a Myrmidon, which we just talked about as with Joshua as not being a very good class, but unlike him, she has just like worse bases and doesn't like comes way late in the game. She's pretty garbage. She's awful. Promote her to whatever you want. I don't give a shit. She's terrible. Poor Marissa. Yeah. Next up is Mulder. Mulder, I think, is a solid A tier unit. It's just a healer. He's an early healer and actually comes with like pretty good stats. He's pretty comparable to like Saul from Fire Emblem 6, except he's recruited a little earlier, which is just great. He's just great. Yeah, he's pretty boring, to be honest. Great unit. Next up we have Myr. Myr's an interesting unit because she's really as close as this game gets to like an Athos type character, or I guess Goda is the general term. She's a Maneki with 50 uses on her Dragonstone. She has effective damage against monsters, which is fantastic. She has really good growths and good enough bases to find kills for. If you do put a little bit of investment in her, she can really dominate the end game, which is good. But that's pretty much all she can do. I don't know where to put her. I feel like I'm putting too many units in B, but again, I think this is just another like B tier unit. Maybe like high B. I don't know. It depends on how much you value that. Like, I would recommend using Myr on basically every playthrough, but she's definitely not necessary. So, I don't know. I think Myr is good, and she's really fun to use too. I think that's a part of it. Not that that matters in this tier list, but she is good. But like, it's just not. Again, it's not necessary in most playthroughs. Next, we have Natasha, who's really just a worse version of Mulder. The fact that there isn't a third healer early on, and it's basically just Mulder and Natasha, I do think bumps her up a little bit. You know, this isn't like Ellen from Fire Emblem 6 where you have Clarion and Saul so early, so that really bumps her down. Having two healers on certain maps is pretty valuable, although not as much as Fire Emblem 6. And she's fine, maybe like a C tier unit. I don't know. She can promote to use Slayer, which is pretty cool. Oh, Mulder should be a bishop, and so should Natasha. Everyone that can be a bishop should be a bishop. Slayer is one of the best skills in the game, so if you can get access to Slayer, definitely do that. I think maybe C tier. Most playthroughs will, like these units, most playthroughs will use her. There is a niche for her, but I wouldn't really like train her per se. So yeah, I think okay unit. You'll use her in a lot of playthroughs, at least a little bit. Next up is Nemi. Nemi does get the benefit of having the archer promotion option of a ranger, which is really good. Ranger's good. It gives you good movement and the ability to use swords, but I mean, she's just one of these fast little archers, kind of like Rebecca from Fire Emblem 7. Definitely a meme tier unit. We'll put her in the middle here. I don't know. A fun unit to use. Definitely a fan favorite, I think. A favorite of mine, but very weak unit. I would highly recommend promoting her to Ranger and not Sniper if you do decide to train her. There's really no advantages to Sniper. Sniper gets this skill. I don't know what it's called, but it just allows you to hit. When you proc it, you just hit every time, which is not an issue for bow users that I've ever encountered. That's the only advantage you get. Ranger gives you the ability to use swords and additional movement, which are both just amazing. So highly recommend Ranger, but honestly, I wouldn't recommend training her at all. I don't know why Orson. I guess Orson is technically Orson's definitely a meme unit. Orson betrays you, so fuck this guy. Wait, hold on a minute. Hold on. Fuck this guy. There. All right, you can go and fuck this guy territory. Or thing. I mean, he's better than, at least the meme units help you. This motherfucker betrays you. Yeah, okay. Anyways, the way of Renok, I don't know, man. How much you value like a rogue? Renok is recruited pretty late. I don't know how much there really is for Renok to do at the point where he's recruited. I think he's pretty bad. I wouldn't put him in meme tier, but he is pretty bad. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend using him. Next up, we have Ross. So Ross is the one trainee unit that's actually pretty good because he's recruited really early in the game, which is really beneficial. You can get him to a pirate really early. So with Ross, as far as recommendations go, I would recommend pirate. Now, here's the one caveat. If you're training calm, there's only one ocean seal in the game unless you want to do secret shop stuff. So if you want to train calm and Ross, definitely do fighter. But if you don't want to train calm, definitely do pirate. And then Berserker, I think, is his best like final class. Like getting stuff like swords from a hero or bows from a warrior just isn't as useful as the innate crit you get from a Berserker. So I would highly recommend going that route. But again, if you're training calm, you may want to do something else. Now where to put him? I don't know. Like he doesn't really have the niche of these C tier units, but he does have the potential scaling of these B tier units. So maybe just like at the top of C. I don't know. He is good. He is very good. Again, very easy. In fact, you can get him to a pirate on the chapter after you recruit him, the Bandits of Bargo or whatever it's called. But it will, like, as far as efficiency goes, it's not great efficiency. But yeah, if you get him to a pirate early, he is pretty easy to train and pretty darn strong. So I like him quite a bit. Next up, we have Salad. Salad's really good. He's not exactly pent from the previous game, but it's hard to argue. I think I'll still put him in A. Again, he's not as good as Pent from Fire Emblem 7, but then again, the stats of enemies in this game aren't quite as strong. He still offers a lot of that same stuff, pretty good offensive stats, and the ability to immediately use Physic. Now, Salad's usefulness is going to change a little bit because he's recruited earlier on Erica's route than Ephraim's. So perhaps Ephraim's route, he'll be B, and he'll be A on Erica's route. I don't know. Either way, I would highly recommend using Salad. He's amazing. I do think he's very comparable to Pen, even though statistically he's a bit worse. But I do think he's really good. Maybe like high. I don't know. He's good. Next we have Seth. All right. Nobody's been in S tier yet. I think we all know what S tier was reserved for. Seth is an absolute beast. In fact, Seth might be like top 5 unit of all time in any Fire Emblem game ever. He's just so strong. His bases are very comparable to like Marcus from the previous game, which his bases were really good. In fact, Seth's are probably better. So he dominates like a lot of the game, but unlike Marcus from that game, who kind of falls off toward the end, Seth never falls off because he has great growths. You can just use him to dominate the entire game, literally, even on the hardest difficulty, which is busted. And unlike Titania from Path of Radiance, for example, where the end game gets pretty chunky and tough, so she kind of falls off, Seth never falls off. He's just insane. Would highly recommend using him. He's absolutely busted. Very good unit. Next up, we have Cyrene, who is actually, I think, the last unit you recruit in the whole game. Or do you get Myrrh after? No, you get Myrrh before her. Yeah, but she's pretty bad. She's very similar, actually, to Juno from Fire Emblem 6. And Juno sucks in that game, so I don't really know what you're supposed to do with Cyrene. I will give her this. Credit for this. On Darkling Woods, she can do some like transport stuff, and on the Gorgon chapter, she's pretty good at pushing some of the eggs, especially if you don't have other flyers, which is kind of cool. But no, those are pretty small niches for this character. I don't think I want to put her quite a meme because she's still a good class, but very, very mediocre unit. Then we have Tana. Tana is just kind of recruited too late. She does scale better than Vanessa, but she's recruited a lot later than Vanessa. This is, I think, either a B or a C tier unit. She's recruited so late. I think I'll put her down here in C, somewhere around here. I could be undervaluing her. She's an amazing class, don't get me wrong. Pegasus Knight's great. I would recommend turning Pegasus Knights into Wyvern Knights, just like I said with Cormag. Again, with Falcon Knight, you just get swords, whereas with Wyvern Knight, you get Pierce, which is just a good skill, and Lances are better than swords anyways. But she just recruited like so late, and her stats are way worse than like Cormag, for example. Who, if you do Ephraim's route, you actually get Cormag, I think, on the same chapter. Well, technically one chapter earlier, but you get Tana one chapter earlier. I don't know, I might be undervaluing her a little bit, but I just think, like, yeah, efficiency-wise, most of these units are just better than her, I think. And one of the problems with her as well is that she doesn't offer any niche if you don't train her. So, I don't know. But she will be a beast if you train her, don't get me wrong. Next we have Tethys. I don't know, she's a dancer, easy A tier, whatever, who cares, boring. And then Vanessa, who I think, is Vanessa better than Franz? I think Franz and Vanessa are definitely the two best characters in this game, not named Seth. They're both beasts. Again, I would recommend turning Vanessa into a Wyvern Knight, not a Pegasus Knight. I do think she's better than Franz. There are, mostly just because she's a better class, like Wyvern Knight's better than Paladin in the end. Even though Franz is going to be a stronger unit. I don't know. These two can change, I guess, but they're both extremely good units I would highly recommend using. So yeah. But yeah, that's it. Those are all the characters. That is my tier list. Certainly, as always, if you have any comments, concerns, if you agree, if you disagree, feel free to post them down below. I actually think people posting on these videos is very valuable because, you know, if people watch videos, I think they tend to go down to the comments. And, you know, what I have to say about the games is not the end-all be-all, especially when it comes to sorting this stuff. Like, I think I'm much better at playing the games than trying to articulate who's good and who's not. It's much more important to listen to what I have to say about the characters than where they're ranked. So people down in the comments that, again, agree or disagree, I think is really valuable for that. But yeah, so again, you know, feel free to post that kind of stuff. But yeah, if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.